Queen Alara ruled over a world that had only just found peace. For years, different nations had fought for power, each one thinking it could rule better than the rest. The wars had left the land in ruins, and people were tired of pain. When Alara came to power, she promised something new. She wanted unity, not war. Her dream was to make everyone on Earth live under one flag, one purpose, one heart. And slowly she did. Her palace stood high on the cliffs of New Avalon, looking out over silver seas that stretched for miles. From her windows, she could see new cities rising every year, each one built from hope more than stone. But for all her success, there was a kind of loneliness in her life that no crown could fill. She had power, respect, and endless work, but she had no one to share it with. Her days began in meetings and ended in quiet halls where even the echoes were afraid to speak. That changed the day Lucas Hale arrived. Lucas came from a faraway colony, one of the frontier worlds where people worked with their hands and built homes out of nothing but steel, wind, and willpower. He was not like the noblemen Alara met every day. He did not wear rich clothes or speak in polished words. His voice was low, his smile easy, and his eyes carried the calm of someone who had seen more storms than comfort. He came to the palace as a diplomat, a representative of the frontier worlds that now wished to join the Queen's dominion of Earth. When Alara first spoke with him, she noticed something rare. He did not bow too deeply. He did not speak just to impress her. He looked at her as though she were another person, not a symbol or a ruler, and it surprised her. He asked questions about her dreams for the future, about the children who would grow up in the new cities, about the air on the coast, and whether she ever missed walking through street markets without guards. Alara laughed at that. It had been a long time since she had laughed like that with anyone. Their talks continued for days. What started as formal meetings soon became conversations not about policies but about life. Lucas told her how frontier settlers learned to survive long nights of dust storms and how they built schools before they built walls. He described the way young builders painted messages on unfinished towers to remind themselves that hope was stronger than fear. In return, Alara told him about her dreams of a world without war, where people could look up at the sky and see promise instead of danger. It was during these talks that something quiet but powerful began to grow. When Lucas left to return to his colony, Alara felt an emptiness she had not expected. A month later, she received his letter asking her to attend a festival on GalacticPrime, the name of his settlement world. She accepted, not as a queen, but simply as a woman who missed a friend. The festival was bright and full of song. Children ran with ribbons, and the night air glowed with lanterns. Alara saw Lucas among the crowd, dressed simply, his hands helping lift heavy crates, as if he were one of the workers. The sight of him moved her in ways she could not explain. Later that night, as fireworks lit the sky, Lucas confessed that he had come to see her not as a ruler, but as someone he admired deeply. He said, in words that carried neither fear nor formality, that he wished to stand beside her, not above or below her. The queen, who had faced countless battles and stood firm before armies, found her heart trembling in the quiet strength of one man. When they returned to Earth together, the news of their union spread across space. Some praised it as a sign of peace between the core worlds and the frontier. Others whispered against it, saying it was no true match, that a frontier-born man was beneath a queen. But Alara did not listen. Her heart was sure. Their wedding took place under the open sky rather than inside her palace. Workers, farmers, engineers, and children stood shoulder to shoulder with nobles and officers. The vows were simple, and when they were spoken, a gentle wind swept across the field, carrying the cheers of everyone present. That day, for the first time in many years, Queen Alara felt whole. She looked at Lucas and saw not a stranger from the stars, not a symbol of politics, but a man of kindness, dignity, and quiet power. A man who, in his stillness, made her feel stronger and safer than any fortress could. She did not know then that his quiet eyes hid a past that would one day shake the heavens. For now, she simply knew Pizzette, the peace of a woman who believed she had found a partner both humble and extraordinary. And high above them, in the growing light of morning, the world they had both sworn to protect turned silently, unaware that its greatest story had just begun. The months after Queen Alara's wedding to Lucas Hale were full of calm. The people of Earth loved seeing their queen happy again. Trade between the core lands and the frontier worlds grew quickly. Cities glowed brighter with every new day. Music returned to the squares, and schools began to teach about peace instead of war. For a while, it felt as if the world had finally found its balance. But even peace carries shadows. Some members of the royal court were not pleased with the marriage. They called Lucas the builder husband, and they said a man born on the frontier could not understand royal manners. They whispered in hallways, their words smooth as silk, but sharp as knives. Lara ignored them at first, but the whispers grew louder with time. When she sat on her throne, she could feel the uneasy eyes of her council. Many were loyal only because of their fear of her power, not because of their respect for her new husband. Lucas seemed not to notice their doubt, or maybe he only chose not to. Spent most of his time walking through nearby towns, speaking to workers, repairing machines, and visiting the new schools. He said he wanted to see how people lived, not just how they bowed. When Alara asked why he disappeared for hours each day, Lucas only smiled. "I'm learning, my queen," he said in his gentle way. "I want to understand what kind of world we are truly building." At first, she found it sweet. Then it began to worry her. The world beyond the palace walls had once been full of enemies, and though most had been defeated, peace was never completely safe. One evening, she called him to the observatory that looked across the sleeping city. Below them, lights spread like a field of stars. The air carried the faint hum of electric roads and wind towers. "You are the king consort of a united world," she said quietly. "And yet you spend your days fixing water pumps and climbing tower beams. Why?" His eyes met hers, calm as always. "Yes, a crown does not fix a broken pipe," he said. "Yes. And because if peace is to last, it must live in every machine and street, not only in these walls." She watched him carefully, unsure whether she should be proud or uneasy. There was something hidden behind his steady eyes, something deeper than simple humility. That same night, a messenger rushed into the throne room with news. Rebels in the outer sectors had begun attacking the supply lines that reached the northern continents. Their ships had vanished into clouds, but their weapons had done real damage. Alara sent fleets to handle the problem, but the fleets came back with heavy loss. The rebels were not like the ones of the old wars. They fought like ghosts, appearing and vanishing before any aid arrived. How they gained such power was a mystery. The attacks spread fast, hitting colonies across the sky. Panic grew like wildfire. The council shouted for stronger control, for new armies, for total force. Some accused Lucas of being connected to the rebellion, simply because he was born among the frontier people. Alara rose in fury against them. "My husband is loyal," she cried. "He has given nothing but hope to this world." Yet, deep inside, she felt a small tremor of fear she could not explain. Lucas had not spoken much these days. Sometimes she found him alone late at night, looking up at distant stars, his hand resting on the railing, as if he listened to something she could not hear. One stormy evening, she followed him without his notice. He walked out of the castle and entered the old defense chamber below the mountain grounds. It had been sealed for years since the wars ended. She watched as he placed his hand on the steel door. To her shock, the door opened with a whisper of light. Alara wanted to step forward but stopped herself. Her heart beat fast. She remembered his words, "I'm learning how the wind moves before the storm." The next morning, the attacks grew bolder, nearer. News channels cried out about burned cities and lost fleets. The council demanded her to make a choice, to fight or to surrender some lands in exchange for peace. Lucas stood beside her quietly, saying nothing while anger filled the room. Then, at last, he spoke. "You cannot trade freedom for safety," he said. "You must hold the heart of Earth firm. Trust that strength does not always come from what others see." The council stared. Even Alara fell silent. When the meeting ended, she followed him through the long hallways, her voice full of worry. "Lucas, what do you mean by that? What strength?" He turned to her, his face calm but his eyes alive with something fierce and old. "The kind that only wakes when nothing else can save us," he said softly. Alara wanted to ask more, but then alarms echoed across the palace. The sky outside had turned red. The enemy fleet had arrived at Earth's orbit. And with that, the truth about Lucas Hale began to rise from the shadows. The morning began with quiet light touching the towers of New Avalon. A calm sea glittered outside the palace, and for a short moment it looked as if the world was still safe. Then the sound of sirens broke the peace. The sky filled with streaks of fire. The enemy fleet had entered Earth's orbit and was moving closer. Queen Alara walked quickly to the control room, her guards hurrying behind her. Screens showed explosions above the cities. Defense ships tried to block the attack but were outnumbered. Lightning from the enemy's weapons struck the shields around the palace, shaking the ground. The court shouted, each voice trying to give orders the other would not hear. Alara stood tall among them. "Hold the main line," she said. "Keep the capital safe. Send word to every colony that Earth will not fall." But even as she spoke, she saw fear on the faces of her staff. The power of the attack was beyond anything they had seen. Some of the strongest ships were already falling through the clouds like burning stones. Lucas entered the room quietly. His clothes were covered in dust, his eyes calm but bright. When he looked at the screens, he did not panic. He only walked to the window and stared at the sky, where red streaks filled the clouds. Lucas, Alara said, trying to sound firm. "This is war. I need to know what you are planning. Said you understood the storm that was coming. Tell me now." He turned to her, his voice steady. "You once asked why I walked among the workers and builders. It was to learn where true strength lives. It is time to use what we built." Alara frowned, not understanding. "Our fleets are broken. The shields are falling. What do you have beyond that?" Lucas took a deep breath. "You have seen me as a simple man who fixes machines." "That is true. But I was also the one who designed the core defense systems long ago, before I left the wars. I built them to stay silent until the right hands called them awake." The court gasped. Alara could not speak. She had never known this about him. Lucas moved to a console, pressed his hand against a scanner, and whispered old access words that had not been used in decades. The screens flickered. Deep below the surface of Earth, old machines began to stir. Hidden defense towers rose from the seas and mountains. Satellites that had long been thought dead turned toward the enemy fleet. On the main display, lights began to bloom across the dark side of the planet. New signals appeared, machines long forgotten joining in one rhythm. Lara's heart pounded. "You did this. You planned this years ago?" "I never stopped preparing," he said. "Peace is precious, but it only lasts when we protect it." The attack continued. The enemy fleet rained fire upon the capital, but now beams of white light shot from the hidden towers, striking back with perfect aim. The sky became a storm of light and noise. The ground trembled with the force of it. Alara ran to the balcony to see it with her own eyes. The night above the city burned with trails of color. Ships exploded far beyond the clouds. The people below cheered as the shields strengthened again. For the first time since the attack began, hope filled their hearts. Lucas stood beside her, calm and focused. "They will not reach you," he said softly. "Why?" Alara looked at him, hardly breathing. "Who are you really, Lucas Hale?" "A man who once promised never to fight again," he answered. "But also a man who swore to protect what he loves." Down below, the last of the enemy ships began to break apart. Their remaining vessels fled toward the outer orbit, chased by Earth's reawakened defense grid. When silence finally returned, the sky was full of drifting lights, the remains of a battle that would be remembered for generations. Inside the palace, the council gathered again, silent and humbled. The same voices that had once doubted him now looked at Lucas, as if he were something beyond their understanding. Alara turned to face her husband. "All this time, you held such power and you said nothing?" "I wanted to prove that peace was worth more than force," he said. "I only hoped I would never need to show it." She touched his arm gently. "You saved us all," she whispered. He smiled faintly. "We saved ourselves. It just reminded the world what it could be when we stand together." Outside the window, dawn began to rise. The city lights dimmed as sunlight touched the towers once more. People stepped out of their shelters to see the calm sky. Children pointed upward, speaking of the mysterious man who had turned the tide. Alara watched them and felt tears she did not hide. For the first time, she understood what strength truly meant. It was not loud, not cruel, not cold. It was the quiet courage that stayed hidden until the moment it was needed most. Lucas said nothing more. He only stood beside her as the new sun climbed higher, lighting the peaceful world they had both fought to protect. The smoke of battle had not yet cleared when peace returned to Earth. The people filled the streets, cheering their queen and her husband. Songs were sung in every city, about courage and hope, about the night when Earth itself seemed to wake and defend its own. But inside the high palace of New Avalon, Queen Alara walked in silence. The world called her a hero, yet her mind was full of questions that would not rest. She kept seeing Lucas standing there in the flashing lights of battle, calm like a man who had already lived this war before. For days after the victory, Alara watched him carefully. Lucas spent long hours checking the defense systems he had reawakened. He spoke little about how he had known the hidden network even existed. She wanted to ask him, but every time she looked into his eyes, she saw both kindness and an old sadness. She could not bring herself to turn her questions into suspicion. That night, she sent away her guards and went to find him. He was standing in the observatory again, the same place where they had once spoken about peace and dreams. The stars looked brighter after the storm, and quiet music from the city below reached them through the open glass doors. She stood near him, her voice soft but steady. "Tell me the truth, Lucas. Who are you really?" Looked at her slowly as though he had been expecting those words. "I thought I had left that part of me behind," he said. But when the attack came, knew peace could not survive lies. He walked over to the large window where the reflection of the stars danced on the floor. Then he began to speak, and his story unfolded like something too heavy for one heart to carry. Long before Alara became queen, Lucas had been a leader in the old wars. He had seen entire nations burn and cities vanish in dust. He had fought not for pride, but to protect the weak, when there were few left who still cared to fight for honor. When the wars ended, he had refused all titles. Blood and noise had become too heavy. He left the armies and went to the frontier where people built small homes out of empty land. There he built machines and taught others how to live again without fear. He promised himself he would never pick up power again. "But then I met you," he said quietly. "You reminded me what hope looked like. I wanted to believe that maybe humanity could finally rest. But I also knew that peace is never safe for long." Alara listened quietly. Her hands were trembling, but her voice did not. "You hid it from me. You made me believe you were only a builder." "I am still a builder," he said. "I built this peace with you. But I could not leave the world unguarded. The systems I made to protect Earth, I buried them, locked them away so deep no one could find them. I only hoped I would never have to wake them again." She looked away, torn between pride and sorrow. "You carried this alone all this time." "Why?" "Because the world needed a queen who ruled with faith, not fear," he said, stepping closer. "And because I did not want to remind you that power always comes with a price." They stood in silence for a while, the city lights flickering far below. Outside, children laughed, unaware of how close they had come to losing everything. Alara turned back to him at last. Her voice was soft, filled with both love and pain. "But now the world knows your strength. You could rule beside me not as my consort, but as an equal in all things. Why not take your place openly?" He smiled a faint, tired smile. "Because if the world begins to see me as the weapon that saved it, then fear will return. Let them see their queen as the one who led them to victory. Let them build their future on faith, not on my hidden fire." Her eyes filled with tears, but she nodded slowly. "Then promise me one thing, never hide from me again. I can carry the truth, no matter how heavy." "I promise," he said, and for the first time in many years, his voice broke a little. Outside, the bells of the city began to ring in celebration. People danced in the streets, their laughter drifting up through the night air. The palace glowed softly, its walls reflecting the silver light of distant satellites. Alara and Lucas stood together watching it all. Around them, the wind whispered through the quiet halls, carrying the scent of the new dawn. The night that had begun with fear now ended with peace, and yet they both understood that this peace was alive only because someone had been willing to stand in its silence. Lucas took her hand. "The world is safe for now," he said. "But safety does not mean we stop watching. I will keep guard, quietly, as long as there is breath in me." Alara squeezed his hand. "And I will keep hope alive, as long as there is light. Together, they looked toward the horizon where the first touch of sunrise painted the clouds gold. The long night was over, and though both knew storms might come again, neither feared them anymore. They had seen what humanity could rise to be when courage and love walked hand in hand. Years passed after that great war. Earth had grown brighter and stronger than ever. Cities that had once been dark with smoke now shone with towers of glass and gardens that climbed their sides. The seas were clean again, the air clear, and the people no longer spoke of fear but of progress and hope. The name of Queen Alara was known across every continent and colony. She was loved deeply, but beside her name, the people always whispered another Lucas Hale, the quiet man who had saved their world. Children who had not lived through the battles grew up with tales of courage. They played games, pretending to be the builder who had awakened the sleeping machines. They would shout for Earth and for the Queen, and run through the streets laughing. The world had found peace, and yet both Alara and Lucas knew the cost of it better than any song could tell. Alara still ruled from the palace of New Avalon, and every evening she and Lucas would walk through the palace gardens that looked out over the sea. Flowers bloomed in colors that had not been seen for years, brought back by careful hands and pure wind. The old scent of war was gone. In its place came the smell of salt and life. Sometimes, when the day was done and the sky turned red with sunset, Alara would look at Lucas as he watched the horizon. He always seemed to be listening for something far away, as if the stars were calling softly to him. She would smile and say, "You still think like a soldier," and he would answer quietly, "No. I think like a man who knows peace never sleeps." Together they built new plans for the future. They opened schools for builders, healers, and explorers. They started missions to distant colonies, not for war, but for learning and friendship. Under their rule, the reach of humanity spread far beyond the old borders, but this time without greed or conquest. The people worked together as one family, yet even in peace, small troubles always returned. There were places where greed still lived, and where men who wanted quick power tried to stir discontent. When news of these small rebellions reached the Queen, she no longer felt fear. Instead, she looked toward Lucas, and he would nod with calm eyes. "Leave it to the people," he would say. "They have learned what they are capable of now." One night, a festival was held in honor of the Decade of Peace. The city shone like a field of stars, with lights floating over the streets and music filling every corner. Alara stood on a high balcony as voices sang below. Lucas stood beside her, his arm resting lightly around her shoulders. "I remember another night when there were fires, not lanterns, in the sky," she said. "It feels like a lifetime ago." "It was a lifetime ago," he said softly. "We just lived through it together." When the fireworks began, the night lit up with color and sound. Alara smiled as she looked at her people celebrating. The joy on their faces reminded her that the struggles had been worth every sacrifice. Later, when the crowd grew quiet and the night deepened, Lucas led her down to the gardens. Electric lights floated above the water in gentle motion, stopped near the edge of the fountain, and looked at her with the same gaze that once held strength and sadness together. "Alara," he said, "I think the time has come for me to go beyond the frontier once more." She froze. "Go. For what reason?" "There is more to learn," he said. "Systems I rebuilt are stable. The world no longer needs a soldier to guard it. It needs dreamers and builders and leaders who trust themselves. You taught them that. Now I must see what lies beyond where our light ends. Perhaps there are things still hidden that we must one day face. I want to be ready for that day." Her hands tightened around his. "You can't just leave," she whispered. "You're part of this piece. You're a part of me. I will never be truly gone," he said. "Everything I know, everything I am, is part of this world now. And part of you." Tears filled her eyes, but she understood. I had always known that his heart was made of restless courage, the same fire that had saved them all. The next morning, Lucas walked to the great spaceport by the sea. Thousands came to watch him depart. He waved to the crowd with a calm smile. Alara stood at the platform trying to be strong. When he looked at her one last time, she smiled through her tears. He nodded once, like a promise. The ship lifted slowly into the sky, bright in the morning sun, until it became a single spark among the clouds, and then disappeared. Years later, people would tell stories that the builder had gone to find new worlds. Others said he had become part of the stars themselves, still watching, still guarding. Queen Alara grew older, but ruled with more wisdom than ever before. She kept his promise alive in every law, every dream, and every child taught to believe that human hands could shape miracles. And on calm nights, when the wind carried the sound of the sea through her open window, she would close her eyes and whisper, "Peace never sleeps." I remember. Somewhere far away, beyond the reach of all maps, the man who had once revealed his true strength smiled in answer, and the universe itself seemed to listen in silence.